probably going up there to go down and fly.
In the lead, beautiful scarlet comet, the very aircraft in which Charles W.A. Scott and Tom Campbell Black won the 1934 McRoberts International Air Race from the newly opened airfield from Hall in Suffolk to Melbourne, Australia.
Today's money is £365,000. Still a lot of money, but discount on the actual cost to have of building it.
The diminutive white aeroplane flying on the left wing of the comet. Percival Newgall, registration GAXF. The very aeroplane, albeit much rebuilt since then, in which the late Alex Henshaw not only won the King's Cup Air Race in 1938 at a record speed, wasn't beaten for 29 years to the P-51 Mustang to beat it, but in which February 1939, he set a new record for flying from London to Cape Town and back. Quite a remarkable feat in this tiny, high-performance aeroplane. Only recently, this year's running of the Le Mans 24 Hours, won the 24 Hours of Le Mans for Lagonda, alongside Johnny Hindmarsh. Obviously starting to go north, then going to Baghdad, Allahabad, Singapore, Darwin, Carville in Australia, and then Melbourne. And you could actually stop wherever you liked on top of those compulsory stops. And indeed they contrived with Shell, the fuel and oil company, to provide supplies at a number of 22 optional stops en route.
Manufacturing Company Limited. This is based in Addleston in Surrey, about 400 yards from the entrance to my school, on a site that later became Plessy Radar.
Never produced by Walker. This one, a replica built by Don Cashmore, and today owned by Shuttleworth Collection, as indeed since the Annick. The Annick 1 was built for the 1923 edition of the Little Trials. It first flew at Brooklands, back towards the Blackburn Tactic engine, 660 years to red. This was the number 4 red, which went into the Science Museum's collection as early as 1924. Stayed there for more than 20 years. Went back to the manufacturer in it's been part of the Shuttleworth collection since 1957.
But a lot of the requirements of these and the reason why the Annex 2 made its maiden flight at Brooklands is that Addleston doesn't have and never has had any runways, and so the aircraft will be transported by road to nearby Brooklands and Weybridge for its first flight.
The Red, meanwhile, first flown on the 5th of April 1923 from Ashton Park in Preston. The prototype appeared at that year's Royal Air Force pageant at Hendon, and it flew very well indeed, being able to attain a maximum speed of 52 miles an hour. This on the 3 horsepower, 398cc ABC motorcycle engine. As we can see, its performance today, perhaps rather more marginal, but nonetheless exemplary, following a refurbishment a couple of years ago. And this is now one of 2 English electric-built aircraft airworthy in the world. The other one being the recently reflown English electric Canberra jet bomber of the Royal Australian Air Force's historical squadron based at Temora. And it's hard to believe
Many specifications that were successfully ignored what the ministry had been deciding and built things like the DA-61.
yes, absolutely. They place rather too much attention on staging the Little Trials on the issue of fuel economy. That, of course, is not necessarily a route to practicality. For example, 2 of the Annie's were ready for the 1923 Little Trials. The second of them won the main fuel economy prize jointly with an
Racing us from the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. This is their Dakota, which they have in the past used for training up their pilots in multi-engine tailwheel. I was talking about the tailwheel operations there. There are no modern tailwheel multi-engine aircraft, and so to keep the pilots current for the Lancaster operations, they've been using this. But the aircraft has become so popular, it's now become part of their airshow season itself. This actual model itself is in fact a Douglas C-47 Skytrain, which has then been painted back into Dakota colours. This particular one having been with the Americans and then the US Army Air Force and then the Canadian Air Force after that. But now authentically back into RAF Dakota markings. Skytrain was the American name, Dakota was the RAF name, from left to right.
Transporting supplies and performing the whole gamut of military transport operations.
As navigator, and Master Odler, Air Lane Master, here's Wakem. Flying back to RAF Coningsby.
After placing the Lancaster. and the let-off LF-107 Lunyak. Into a tail slide and then build up energy to do some aerobatics. By contrast now, the rather more sedate form of the de Havilland DH-51.
A very rare aircraft. De Havilland only built 3 of these. First flight in 1924. Originally they had this based on a 90 horsepower war surplus engine, but it only had a single ignition system and would require a lot of development, and so they decided to fit a V8 to it. The V8 was no longer economical, and so it really was too large an aircraft, too uneconomical. It was not something that could be pursued as a suitable either military trainer or for the what they hoped was the commercial training and touring market.
Yes, and it's an interesting precursor of this aircraft, the de Havilland Moth family that followed, because as we were saying earlier, the little trials aircraft for which de Havilland produced the DH-53 Hummingbird were not practical light aeroplanes, and neither was this really.
Well, I really rather think of Goldilocks, that the de Havilland Hummingbird was too small and too underpowered, and this was too large and too heavy and too expensive. But the DH-60 Moth, which went on to become the most popular light aircraft in the whole world, that one was just right.
Himself realised the DH-51's shortcomings. It's being reasonably low price. This one was the last of the 3 DH-51s built. And to regular Shuttleworth visitors, I'm sure it's still known amongst many of you as Miss Kenya, because it was shipped to Nairobi the year after it was built in 1926 and became the first ever aircraft on the Kenyan Civil Aircraft Register. It was during that time that it was named Miss Kenya. And one of its owners out there was Tom Campbell Black, who later became co-winner of the McRobertson Air Race with CWA Scott in the Comet Grosvenor House. It was earmarked for preservation by the Shuttleworth collection. In 1965 it was air freighted back to the UK in the hold of an RAF Blackburn Beverley transport. It was flown to on board in 1972 and it's been here ever since.
Symbolic again of how the Shuttleworth collection brings you the rarest. This was one of 3, and that was one of 5, and one of 6. Again and again, the aircraft here are some of the rarest in the world, all together in one place. We're really privileged to be seeing all this in airworthy condition as well.
In 2011, it was refinished in this current scheme, which is that of pre-war airline, aircraft transport and travel. This was for a British Airways commercial that included representatives of aircraft flown by BA and its predecessor airlines in the past. And aircraft transport and travel, or AT&T, was the first of those carriers, the lineage of which can be traced through to the modern British Airways. And it represents the equivalent Airco-built types that were
shortly take off to hold. Spitfires are notorious for overheating if you leave them on the ground too long, and so pilots always prefer to get them airborne when they can, and not have them sitting for too long with the engines running, and so they'd be far happy to be holding whilst the next display, our First World War display, which is next up, takes place. Going to war in the First World War was the very first time that a foreign air power had ever gone abroad to fight. And the Royal Flying Corps were those pioneers. The 30th of August 1914, up until that date, only 50 people had actually flown across the Channel, but on that date, that number was doubled. As numbers 2, 3, 4 and 5 came across it. The answer is number one story was balloons. You really was not sure at that time on yourselves of the development of the fighter.
And indeed, in spite of their initial use by the Royal Naval Air Service and both the triplane and PUP, both also employed by the Royal Flying Corps, though the triplane in much smaller numbers than the PUP. The Camel likewise, an aircraft common to both of those flying services.
The number of Camels made way exceeds the other two. It's almost 5,500 to be built. Very successful aircraft. Quite difficult to fly, I understand, in the hands of a master supreme.
Flown from a field near Bedford. Of course, been the great pioneer of carrier-borne aviation when on the 2nd of August 1917, Squadron Commander Edwin Duddy used one to make the first ever landing on a moving ship, that vessel being HMS Furious. Following it round, the triplane, the first free reproduction aircraft superbly built for the collection by the Northern Aeroplane Workshops.
Sector Park was running the Sandown Airport on the Isle of Wight.
Alex Henshaw, who we talked about earlier in the context of the Mugal, worked for Miles Aircraft and delivered one of these to the Belgian Congo. closed off under cover of darkness to get away. Range and that also enables very long-range flights to be undertaken. Former RAF fighter pilot, Group Captain A.F. Bush Bandit, bought a Gemini and in late 1946 and early 47 flew it to his home in Australia as the first postal shuttle flight in the UK and Australia. The journey took him 35 days, during which he flew on 15, and he said the aircraft once got him through a 15-mile wide tropical storm. The story of the Gemini that became the first aircraft owned and operated by the Mission Aviation Fellowship. That organisation used it in 1948 on a survey mission to East and Central Africa, where it visited missionaries, saw how aircraft could help them, and assessed the practicalities of operating in this very difficult terrain before it was unfortunately written off in Burundi. This one was first registered in October 1947. It had many private owners, one of them on Clement Spencer Thomas of Huntingdon in Bedfordshire, had it for 33 years, 1948 to 81. And this aircraft was also raced in the 1981 King's Cup Air Race from Finningley in South Yorkshire. Since late 2017, it's been owned by its current owner, Stu Blanchard, and he has two other very interesting Miles aeroplanes in his collection, currently being restored. One of them is in Hull. That's the sole surviving airworthy example of the Miles Mercury. And he also has a very rare M48 version of the earlier Messenger, which is awaiting possible restoration further down the line. So this private pilot has become extremely well versed in all things Miles. They can produce beautiful aeroplanes with excellent performance, as we said, for their class. And we saw that ably demonstrated there. An aeroplane that still looks sprightly down the years. What a lovely sight, a beautiful Miles aeroplane coming in over golden fields. That was Stu Blanchard with the Miles Gemini.
And a wonderful demonstration of a wheeler landing. You'll see his tail hasn't yet touched down. He's just gently pushing forward. And now it drops. The two techniques for landing a tail dragger. One is the old three-pointer, and one is the wheeler landing, so ably demonstrated just then. This type of glider made its first flight in 1948. It's effectively a British copy of a German glider, the SG-38 glider. They built 80 of these and was used mainly post-Second World War for the Royal Air Force, the Air Training Corps and the Combined Cadet Force. It's a single-seat glider with absolute minimal everything. It's got no bodywork around it. Your brave self. If you suffer from vertigo, this is not the glider for you.
He flew the CLA 2, 3 and 4 before he left the RAF in 1929 to set up the Compa Aeroplane Company, of which a director was a certain Richard Ormond Shuttleworth. And this CLA 7 Swift was its first product. Now the first examples had an ABC Scorpion engine that we were talking about earlier in connection with the Lynn trials of just 40 horsepower. They then moved on to a 50 horsepower Samson, and then the Pop Joy R of 75 horsepower, which we see driving this one. The final three were given 130 horsepower to have the Gypsy Major engines. Marketing of this aeroplane is very interesting because they were clearly trying to tap into the market for private pilots in the 1930s who had flown in combat during the First World War. In one period report, Flight Magazine said it was a machine on which those who desired something of the vim of machines of the single-seater fighter class could practice at very small expense. And it all time of 9 days, 2 hours, 29 minutes from Lynn to Darwin.
At a maximum speed of 140 miles an hour. We just saw the fast pass there, and it's not surprising, it's quite a swift machine. A service ceiling of 22,000 feet, that's very high.
Released from the tow, the decidedly vestigial Eon Primary.
Jenny School over at the Corner and Caravan, and he went sailing straight past it. She was dragging him through his nose at it. He said he saw that. Oh, absolutely. So that back always no, see, I'd say,